You heard us talking about it in the news not long ago. A pilot program recently green-lighted by the Calhoun County Board of Commissioners that is meant to help folks who may be homeless or in crisis get an identification, an official identification. Now, for a lot of us, this probably seems like an easy thing, but it really isn't sometimes in certain situations, and that's been recognized now. And not only by the Calhoun County Board of Commissioners, but the United Way of the Battle Creek and Kalamazoo region as well. And today with us, Matt Lynn is back with us, the Director of Community Impact from the United Way. Hello,
Good morning,
Matt.
Richard.
And Robert Elchert is here. Pardon me, Robert Elchert. I almost saw that as an EI, not an EL. Elchert, yes. Hi, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. You actually are the co-chair of the task force that's working on this issue. Is that not true?
That is correct, yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about this for a second. So it might seem like an obvious answer, but why is having an ID important?
Well, a state-issued ID is required for a wide range of nonprofit, governmental, and private sector services.
Sure.
So without having one, people don't have access to financial services, education, basic needs, healthcare services, and a wide range of other services that they need. So they're effectively trapped in a situation that they're in.
So, right, they might be trying to avail themselves of a service. The first question on the path to getting that service would be, show me your ID.
Exactly, and oftentimes a birth certificate as well.
Oh, my. So those things are difficult to come by when these situations are prominent. I mean, if you think about it for a moment, the one thing on your ID is your address. Right. If you don't have one of those, this becomes an issue, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's the barrier here?
Well, the primary barrier is that you need ID to get ID. You also need, as I was saying, vital records such as a birth certificate. And the documentation requirements, along with the cost, are two insurmountable barriers for the homeless population and others who are in crisis.
All right. So we'll talk in a moment about what the magnitude of this problem really is. We presume that if there's a pilot program to try and correct this problem, that it's a significant one, and we'll discuss that in just a moment on 95.3 WBCK. We're checking in periodically with the United Way. Today is one of those days. Matt and Robert are here. We're talking about this pilot program to help those who may be homeless or in crisis get an ID, an official state identification, when these things are difficult to come by in these circumstances. How big is this problem, Robert?
It's a pretty significant problem. We know from national research that about 50% of the homeless population have been denied access to basic needs services because they didn't have an ID or a birth certificate. Mm-hmm. More locally, the task force went to the Battle Creek Homeless Health Fair last year.
Yeah.
We administered 248 surveys, and we found that a quarter of the respondents had said that they did not have an ID or a birth certificate, had trouble obtaining one in the past, and had consequently been denied access to services they needed.
Well, and this makes sense, even if at the onset of their issue or at one time they had an ID, those have to be renewed at certain points in time.
Yeah.
You have to verify your address at those points in time.
Absolutely.
So that could be an issue. And then, when you're in these circumstances, I presume there's theft and loss, and all of these things come into play, don't they?
It's very difficult for a homeless individual to protect their belongings, obviously.
Yeah. So this task force then came together how, and as a result, we presume, of this problem and the magnitude of it?
Yeah, so last year, the Calhoun and Kalamazoo County ID Task Force was adopted as a working group under the Calhoun County Homeless Coalition and the Kalamazoo County Continuum of Care. It's a collaborative effort of service providers in the United Way all working together to remove these barriers so that folks can access the services they need. We have two components to our work that we've implemented in Calhoun County. The first being taking advantage of a Secretary of State pilot program that works in conjunction with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness that provides an alternative pathway for homeless individuals to prove their identity, to obtain a state ID. The second component that you mentioned at the beginning of the program was working with County Clerk Ann Norlander and our county commissioners to get a resolution passed calling for a pilot program that allows for fee waivers for vital records. So those two things in conjunction with each other remove the documentation and the financial barriers most often experienced by homeless individuals and others in crisis. And we're starting to do this work now in Kalamazoo County.
And I presume, too, when you have the Secretary of State on the other end saying this is something we need to stand behind, that helps when the state is behind it, right?
Absolutely. And she was on board right away. She had recognized the problem, as did so many of the commissioners, and they said, they all agreed that this was a problem that needed to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. So how does the process work then? Now that you have some sort of a structure that you can conceive of here, how will this actually walk through for some folks?
So if you are a service provider serving the homeless population and you receive funding from HUD, you are required to enter data into the homeless management information system. So this is a system that helps service providers verify somebody's identity, track their progress, and it also allows them to print out an ID with their picture, name, and other information. Now that ID, along with other documentation, is submitted to the Secretary of State's office ahead of time. They receive pre-approval, and then that homeless individual or other person in crisis can then take those documents down to the Secretary of State's office and fulfill the ID requirement for obtaining a state ID.
Okay. So how does the address part work? If you don't have an address, a state ID typically would have your address on it. How does this work now?
So one of the forms you can use for that is a shelter verification letter. So if you're a client at a shelter and you've been staying there for a while, they can produce a letter saying that you basically are living there and that that is your address.
Okay, and that helps overcome that issue.
Yeah.
We come back in a moment. We'll talk a little bit more broadly about this because Matt has been here on other occasions talking to us and Chris and others about the more broad goals of the United Way and its campaign here and focused on certain needs, financial stability and basic needs and things. We presume this fits, and we'll talk about that coming up in just a moment on 95.3 WBCK. We're here talking about, a special program that the United Way is involved in, as well as a special task force in Calhoun County to try and get folks who are homeless with an ID in their hands, which for a lot of folks might not seem like a huge thing, but it turns out that it is. Robert Elchert is here, and he is on the task force, co-chairing that task force that's working to get a pilot program going in Calhoun County to that effect. And Matt Lynn is here from the United Way as well, and we'll talk about how this fits in with the overall United Way focus going on right now. Robert, you mentioned that one of the barriers to this for folks is the fee structure, and we've been able to get through that here, haven't we?
Absolutely. So, again, we worked with County Clerk Ann Norlander and several of our county commissioners, and they recognized the problem right away. They were very supportive, and we're very grateful for their support. So the way this works now is clients of the Share Center in Battle Creek can obtain a fee waiver request form, and along with all the other documentations that are required, they send the client to the county clerk's office. Mm-hmm. And then they can obtain a fee waiver for obtaining birth certificates. They will get 2 copies. One will go with the individual and one will stay at the Share Center. In that case, something happens to the original copy, they have a backup copy that they can easily obtain. So the pilot program runs through December 31st with a cap of $3,000. We're very optimistic that it'll be successful, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue doing this work in the future.
Mm-hmm. And it would set a model, an example by which others can be structured.
Absolutely, and I had forgot to mention earlier that much of our work is modeled after successful programs in Oakland, Wayne, and Macomb counties.
Okay,
so,
right. So, Matt, when we talk about trying to get folks' basic needs and help with financial stability, boy, you really get down in the minutia sometimes.
Absolutely.
But this is a no-brainer. You got to have an ID.
You do have to have an ID. It's one of those where just imagine all the things that you're able to do because of having an idea and then flip the coin and all the things you're not able to do, just with quality of life without having that really critical identification. It's mind-boggling in some respects, and the things that we just take for granted every day.
Is this complicated when you're trying to keep a 50,000-foot view and keep the goal in mind and hit that goal, and you're looking at it from the broader perspective, and now here we are trying to deal with just this one problem? Does this make it complicated?
It can, I think, if you think about it in its totality.
Yeah.
Of where this fits into the big picture of everything you're trying to do to really look at change in the community. But where we benefited from this opportunity was having spent time in the community, listening to people and asking questions about what are their issues of concern, what are things that would help to change their life. And this was one of those issues that's born out of hearing from people in those conversational opportunities, which we feel blessed and with the opportunity to take advantage of something and be able to come back to the community and say, your voice was heard. You took action on it, and here now is the result of that. And that really is a hallmark for what United Way looks to do in terms of our work to change the community.
Well, and we presume that in the process of this, that some of the problems that folks encounter are not easy fixes. And this one, I'm not suggesting it sounds like you snapped your fingers and it was over, but I mean, this one, you could see the path to trying to get this done, right?
We could. Yeah, it became very clear in terms of where we needed to go and what direction needed to happen. So, again, I join Robert in saying a big thank you to Ann Norlander, our Board of Commission, the Share Center and their leadership along with us, the ID Task Force, and all the people that have contributed to making this work happen. You're right, this is not an easy fix. When we talk about 40% of our population, 4 out of every 10 that financially struggle, beyond just our homeless population, all those that are in financial constraint one way or another, this is the population that we're really wanting to target. We've put some very dynamic goals out for our organization as well as for the community. When we talk about creating a safety net where every person has access to those services they need, when we talk about financial stability and economic stability for households, those are not easy goals to achieve. We need the community to really support us and really work in a shared capacity where everybody can contribute to making those goals happen.
So what's next?
Well, it's doing things like this. It's taking the opportunity to really talk with the community, share what's going on, and extend an invitation for people to get involved. And what that looks like is people financially supporting United Way's work. We need the community to really be a part of ultimately the goals that we tend to achieve. We want to give people an opportunity to volunteer, to be a part of the work that's happening in those spaces of basic needs, as well as financial stability and our other bodies of work in education and in health. We want to give people an opportunity to advocate, to lend their voice. This is like we're talking about something that changes the picture at a legislative level as well. So engaging our local legislators, telling them thank you for being a part of this, encouraging them, saying they're doing the right things by activating themselves and getting engaged in things like this.
And so somebody's hearing that now and you're called to do that. What's the first step?
Well, we give people an opportunity to connect in with our website at www.changethestory.org to get more information about how they can be involved in volunteerism or advocacy or giving. We encourage people to contact our office. They can contact me or Robert if they call 269-343-2524. You can talk to us at any time and find out more information about this. Or even as we go forward and we're at county commission meetings as well, talking about this into the future. Attend one of those meetings. They do have public forums and public comment opportunities, so lend your voice to this as well if you feel like this is something that's important to you.
All right. And Robert, you said this program will focus till the end of the year. Then I presume there's a study period to figure out what kind of results you got.
Correct. So the task force has kind of moved from implementation into data collection phase. So that's very important because we want to demonstrate success so that the pilot program can continue And ideally, other counties might look into it and do similar efforts. So,
And it's probably not a situation where you expect that you eradicate the problem, but the more IDs you put in people's hands, the problem probably reduces itself significantly.
absolutely, and it's just good policy. We know from studies that cycling people through shelters and hospitals is far more costly than it would be to provide supportive housing programs. And of course, those programs are all things that require IDs and vital records. So,
all right. Well, we appreciate the update on all this. ChangeTheStory.org for more details if you want to take a look at that. Matt, Lynn, and Robert Elchert, thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
We'll
Richard.
stay in touch.